Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum. Hello everybody. My dear students at Port Said University Faculty of Commerce, English program, 4th year. This is our course International Marketing, and in this lecture we are going to complete the topic that we are trying to cover in this time, entitled The Scope and the Challenge of International Marketing. The Scope and the Challenge of the International Marketing. And in this lecture, we are going to learn about some learning objectives. What should you learn in this lecture? After the current lecture, you will be able to discuss the following 2 points. The first point is the big challenge: knowing your stakeholders, managers, and ethical decisions. And as you remember, we will start this lecture from the ethical decisions, as we have completed the discussion of your stakeholders and your managers at the previous lecture. So, we'll start from the ethical decision. After that, we are going to discuss the second point, strategic orientation of international marketing. The big challenge: knowing your stakeholders, managers, and ethical decisions. Ethics and ethical decisions. Ethics and ethical decision. Indeed, the topic of ethics is very important in local marketing and will be more important and very critical for your business at the international context. Because at the international context, there are some perceptions, there are different culture. So you have to take ethical decisions in order to avoid the problem in the international markets. And these problems will be critical for your business. So, top managers and organizational ethics. Ethical dilemma. The ethical dilemma is the quandary people experience when they must decide whether or not they should act in a way that benefits someone else, even if it harms others and isn't in their own interest. So, if you have to take a decision and this decision will benefit some persons, so there is no any ethical dilemma. But the ethical dilemma occurs when you try to take a decision and this decision at the first side will benefit someone else, and at the another side will harm others and isn't in their own interest. So you have an ethical dilemma. The ethics can be defined as moral principles or beliefs about what is right or wrong. So you have to understand the topic of ethics, and you have to learn how can you solve the ethical dilemma that you may have if you are going to take a decision. Ethics and the law. The differences between ethics and the law. Laws specify what people and organizations can and cannot do. Laws specify sanctions, punishments when laws are broken. So we can conclude that laws are very specific and clear-cut. And although ethics and laws are relative, the problem in ethics that there are no absolute or unvarying standards exist to determine how people should behave in different situations. This is the problem of ethics. No absolute or unvarying standards exist to determine how people should behave in different situations. Ethics and organizational stakeholders. So, if you are going to work for international business, so you will find that you have a lot of organizational stakeholders and you have to respect the interests of all those stakeholders. Ethics help managers decide how best to respond to their interests of various organizational stakeholders. A decision is probably acceptable on ethical grounds if a manager can answer yes to each of these 3 questions. So, your decision will be ethical decision if you can answer yes to each of the following 3 questions. Does my decision fall within the accepted values or standards that typically apply in the organizational environment? If yes, so your decision is ethical decision. Am I willing to see the decision communicated to all stakeholders affected by it? If yes, so your decision is ethical decision. If not, of course, it will be not. It will be an ethical decision. Will the people with whom I have significant personal relationship approve the decision? If they approve the decision, so your decision is ethical decision. And if not, your decision, of course, is an ethical decision. So, how can I determine if my decision is ethical decision or not? Is there any approaches to determine this? Yes. Indeed, yes. And this is what we are going to understand now. The ethics help people determine moral responses to situations in which the best course of action is unclear. So, if you have a situation unclear, vague, foggy, so ethics help people determine moral responses to these situations. Ethics guide managers in their decisions about what to do in various situations. Ethics also help managers decide how best to respond to the interests of various organizational stakeholders. Indeed, philosophers have debated for centuries about the specific criteria that should be used to determine whether decisions are ethical or unethical. And this table summarizes the 3 models of what determines whether a decision is ethical. The first approach is utilitarian model. The second approach is moral rights model. The third one and the last one is justice model. So there are 3 approaches can be used to determine the ethical decision. Utilitarian model, moral rights model, and justice model. And we will start with the utilitarian model. According to the utilitarian model, an ethical decision is one that produces the greatest good for the greatest number of people. So according to this approach, the ethical decision is one that produces the greatest good for the greatest number of people. The managerial implications, how do managers can use this model? Managerial implications meaning how do managers can use this model? Indeed, managers should compare and contrast alternative courses of action based on the benefits and courses of these alternatives for different organizational stakeholders groups. They should choose the course of action that provide the most benefits to stakeholders. So, the managerial implications meaning how do managers can use this model? For example, managers should locate a new manufacturing plant at the place that will most benefit its stakeholders. should benefit the community. For example, they must locate a new manufacturing plant at the place that will benefit the community overall. Problems of managers. Problems of managers meaning that there are a lot of barriers for using this model. There are a lot of barriers and obstacles for using this model. For example, how do managers decide on the relative importance of each stakeholder group? How are managers to measure precisely the benefits and harms to each stakeholder group? For example, how do managers choose among the interests of stakeholders, workers, and customers? Do managers prefer the interests of stakeholders or their workers or their customers? So, there are a lot of obstacles and barriers related to using this model to determine the ethical decision. The second approach that can be used to determine the ethical decision is moral rights model. An ethical decision according to this model is a decision that best maintains and protects the fundamental rights and privileges of the people affected by it. For example, ethical decisions protect people's rights to freedom, life and safety, privacy, free speech, and freedom of conscience. So, the ethical decisions according to moral rights model protect people's rights to freedom, life and safety, privacy, free speech, and freedom of conscience. The managerial implications, or how do managers can use this model. Managers should compare and contrast alternative courses of actions based on the effect of these alternatives on stakeholders' rights. They should choose the course of action that best protects stakeholders' rights. For example, decisions that will involve significant harm to the safety or health of employees or customers are unethical decisions according to this model. Problems for managers, and you can say the barriers, the obstacles related to using this model. So, the use of any model, not very easy, and you will find many errors for using this model. And as a manager, you have to decide about which model you have to respect, which model you have to use as a criteria to judge your decision. Problems for managers. There are many errors for using this model as well. If a decision will protect the rights of some stakeholders and hurt the rights of others, how do managers choose which stakeholder rights to protect? Problems for managers. Problems for managers meaning the barriers for using this model, barriers for using moral rights model in determining the ethical decision. Because for any approach, for any model, you will find a lot of obstacles, you will find a lot of errors, and as a manager, you have to decide about which one should you utilize. So, if a decision will protect the rights of some stakeholders and hurt the rights of others, how do managers choose which stakeholder rights to protect? For example, in deciding whether it is ethical to snoop on an employee, التحري عنه أو محاولة كشف خصوصياته, does an employee's right to privacy outweigh an organization's right to protect its property, or outweigh the safety of other employees? So this is a big dilemma. The third model for determining the ethical decision is justice model. According to justice model, an ethical decision is a decision that distributes benefits and harms among stakeholders in a fair, equitable, or impartial way. Managerial implications, or how do managers can use this model in the real life. Managers should compare and contrast alternative courses of action based on the degree to which the action will promote a fair distribution of outcomes. For example, employees who are similar in their level of skills, performance, or responsibilities should receive the same kind of pay, should receive the same kind of compensations. The allocation of outcomes should not be based on arbitrary differences like gender, race, or religion. The problems for managers. There are many barriers and obstacles also related to using this model in the real life. Managers must learn not to discriminate against people because of observable differences in their appearance or behavior. Managers must also learn how to use fair procedures to determine how to distribute outcomes to organizational members. Must also learn how to use fair procedures to determine how to distribute outcomes to the organizational members. For example, managers must not give people they like bigger raises than they give to people they don't like, or must not bend the rules to help their favorites. So, there are three approaches can be used to determine the ethical decision as we have studied. The sources of business ethics. Sources of business ethics. There are three main sources of business ethics: societal ethics, professional ethics, individual ethics. Societal ethics codified in a society's legal system, in its customs and practices, and in the unwritten norms and values that people use to interact with each other. The professional ethics, the moral rules and values that a group of people uses to control the way they perform a task or use resources, like the ethical codes for the different professions, like for doctors, like for engineers, auditors, bankers, professors, teachers, etc. The individual ethics, the personal and moral standards used by individuals to structure their interactions with other people. These are the sources of business ethics. Why do ethical rules develop? Why do ethical rules develop? Indeed, the ethical rules develop in order to slow down or temper the pursuit of self-interest. They control self-interested behavior by individuals and organizations that threaten the society's collective interests. So, we need ethical rules. We need ethical rules to keep the overall interests of the society. Ethical rules reduce transaction costs, that is, the costs of monitoring, negotiating, and enforcing agreements between people. And in this example, you will find the relationship between reputation effect and transaction costs. For example, the transaction costs will be higher for organizations with a reputation of illegality, and transaction costs will be lower for organizations with a reputation for honest dealings. Will be higher for organizations with a reputation for illegality, and lower for organizations with a reputation for honest dealings. Why do unethical behavior occur? Indeed, if you think for a while, you will find that there are a lot of ethical and unethical decisions around us. So, why does unethical behavior occur, specifically in the corporations, in organizations? They occur because, first, personal ethics, developed as part of the upbringing and education. Some persons hold ethics, danger ethics. Self-interest. Self-interest weighing our own personal interests against the effects of our actions on others. The outside pressure may make someone take unethical decisions. The outside pressures from the reward systems, industry, and other forces may force organization or the corporation to take unethical decision or to engage in unethical behavior. But indeed, you have to learn and know that it's not justifications for the unethical behavior. We just try to discuss why does unethical behavior occur, but it's not justification for the unethical behavior. As a manager, how can you create an ethical organization? Creating an ethical organization. How can you build and create an ethical organization as a manager or as a business owner? An organization will be ethical if its members behave ethically. So, to build and create ethical organization, you have to do the following. You have to put in place incentives to encourage ethical behavior and punishments to discourage unethical behaviors. Second, managers can lead by setting ethical examples. Third, managers should communicate the ethical values to all inside and outside stakeholders. Designing an ethical structure and control system. How can you design an ethical structure and control system at your organization? Design an organizational structure that reduces incentives to act unethically. Take steps to encourage whistleblowing ليس بمعنى الوشاية قد ما هو بمعنى مكافحة الفساد أو الإبلاغ عن المخالفات. Take steps to encourage whistleblowing, encourage employees to inform about an organization's unethical actions. Establish position of ethics officer and create ethics committee. So, establish position of ethics officer at your organization and try to create ethics committee. Creating an ethical culture. How can you create overall ethical culture at your organization? How can you create ethical culture at your organization? You have to put values, rules, and norms that define an organization's ethical position are part of its culture. Values, rules, norms that define an organization's ethical position are part of its culture. So you have to define your values, rules, and norms. Behaviors of top managers are a strong influence on the corporate culture because they are figurehead for their organizations. Creation of an ethical corporate culture requires commitment from all levels. The creation of an ethical corporate culture will require commitment from all levels of the organization. Supporting the interests of stakeholder groups. Supporting the interests of stakeholders groups. You have to find ways to satisfy the needs of various stakeholder groups. The pressure from outside stakeholders can also promote ethical behavior. The government and its agencies, industry councils, regulatory bodies, and consumer watchdogs all play critical roles in establishing ethical rules. So, all these can support the interests of the stakeholder groups, and all these may force you to follow ethical decisions. So, at the end of this lecture, hope all is going well with you, and see you on the best, inshallah, and thanks a lot.